The town of Harmony Creek had a way of forgetting things. It forgot the names of the men etched into the brass plaque on the courthouse lawn. It forgot the year the old mill closed, leaving a hollow ache where the town's heart used to be. And most of all, it forgot Arthur Pendleton. To them, he was just Old Penn, a fixture as weathered and predictable as the cracked pavement he walked on his daily rounds. He was a man of quiet, rigid routines. The 6 a.m. salute to the flag in his front yard. The slow, limping walk to the diner for a single cup of black coffee. The afternoon spent in his dusty workshop, mending what others had thrown away. He was a ghost in broad daylight, his tall, stooped frame moving through the town with a silence that seemed to ask for nothing. The children, in their casual cruelty, would sometimes mimic his limp. Teenagers would snicker as he paused, hand over his heart, when the flag was lowered at dusk. The adults were kinder, but their kindness was a form of dismissal. Poor old Penn, they'd say. The war did a number on him. They saw his solitude as strangeness, his discipline as obsession, and his silence as the sad, empty echo of a mind long gone. E was the town's harmless eccentric, a story they told themselves without ever knowing the first chapter. Arthur felt their eyes on him, felt the soft-spoken pity and the outright mockery. He had learned long ago to build a fortress of silence around the part of him that could still be wounded. He had lost his wife Eleanor a decade prior, and with her went his voice in the town. She had been the bridge, the one who could translate his quiet strength into something the world could understand. Without her, he was just a man with scarred hands and a past he never spoke of. He lived with her memory, the scent of her rosewater lingering in the linens, the echo of her laughter in the empty rooms of their small, tidy house. His work was his prayer, his routine a bulwark against the tide of grief that threatened to pull him under. He fixed things because it was the only way he knew how to mend the world. One crisp autumn morning, his routine was broken. On his walk, he noticed a young woman, Sarah, standing on the porch of a small rented house, her face a mask of worry. She held a baby in one arm, and with the other, she nudged a loose, splintered porch step with her foot. The wood groaned in protest. Arthur saw the fear in her eyes, the fear of a fall, of a bill she couldn't pay, of one more thing breaking in a life already full of fractures. He said nothing, just tipped his head in a nearly imperceptible nod as he passed. Sarah barely noticed him, lost in her own troubles. The next morning, before the sun had even crested the ridge, Arthur was there. He hadn't knocked. He simply arrived, his old wooden toolbox in hand, its leather handle worn smooth as riverstone. Sarah heard a faint, rhythmic rasping and peered through her window to see Old Penn on his knees, carefully measuring a new piece of seasoned oak. He worked with a surgeon's precision, his movements economical and sure. He planed the edges, sanded the surface until it was silk, and fitted it into place. The new step was seamless, strong, a quiet testament to skill and care. When he was done, he packed his tools and stood. Sarah rushed outside, the baby on her hip. "Mr. Pendleton? I don't know what to say. How much do I owe you?" Arthur looked at the solid step, then at her, his pale blue eyes holding a deep, ancient kindness. "Step was broken," he said, his voice raspy from disuse. "Needed fixing." He turned and walked away before she could protest, his limp more pronounced with the morning chill. He didn't consider it an act of charity. He saw a problem, and he applied a solution. It was as simple as the laws of physics. He was unaware that this small act of repair had planted a seed of fierce loyalty in the heart of a young mother who had felt invisible for a very long time. Weeks later, a great storm tore through Harmony Creek. It was a violent, angry thing, with winds that howled like wolves and rain that fell in solid sheets. When it was over, the town emerged to survey the damage. Branches littered the streets, and a few shingles were missing from rooftops. But the most significant casualty was symbolic. Atop the historic town hall, the grand copper-weather Vannia proud rooster that had greeted the dawn for over a century was mangled. Its tail was bent, its body twisted, and it was locked in place, pointing uselessly west. The town council met. Estimates for the repair were astronomical. The height, the delicate nature of the copperwork, The liability was a problem for specialists, and specialists were expensive. "We can't justify the cost," said the council president, a pragmatic man named Henderson. "We'll have to take it down." A murmur of dissent rippled through the small crowd at the meeting, but it was a tired, defeated sound. The broken rooster seemed to confirm what everyone already felt, that Harmony Creek's best days were behind it. Another piece of their history, another symbol of their pride, was to be dismantled and forgotten. Arthur saw the broken weather vane from his yard. It offended him on a level deeper than aesthetics. It was a failure of duty, a thing of purpose, left broken, a sentinel, fallen from its post. For days, he watched it, his gaze distant. He saw the drooping head, the twisted metal, and he remembered other broken things, other duties that had to be performed under impossible circumstances. He saw a fallen soldier on a rocky ledge, a medevac helicopter unable to land, the wind whipping at him as he was lowered on a steel cable, his hands working desperately to stop a bleed while the world spun around him. The town had no idea that Arthur Pendleton wasn't just a handyman. He was Sergeant First Class Pendleton, retired, a combat medic. In the forgotten corners of military lore and the memories of the men whose lives he had saved, he had a name, the Albatross. They called him that because he could do his work anywhere, under any conditions, suspended from a rope, crammed in a firefight, with the world coming down in flames. He had a preternatural ability to create stillness in the heart of chaos. One morning, just before dawn, Arthur made his decision. He gathered ropes, pulleys, and a small, select set of tools. He walked to the town square, the familiar ache in his leg, a dull metronome counting out his steps. The streets were empty. He slipped through the unlocked side door of the town hall and began the long climb up the dusty, winding stairs to the bell tower. From there, he pushed open a narrow maintenance hatch and emerged onto the steep, slate roof. The wind was sharp, a cold knife against his cheeks. The world fell away below him, but Arthur felt no fear. He had been in higher, more precarious places. He anchored his ropes with the practiced efficiency of a man who had trusted his life to knots. As the sun rose, the town began to stir. The first to see him was the baker, who stopped his delivery truck in the middle of the street and stared, mouth agape. "Good heavens," he muttered. Old Penn's finally lost it. Soon, a crowd gathered. Whispers turned to shouts of alarm. Someone called the sheriff. They saw a crazy old man, a fragile relic, courting death on the rooftop. They saw a tragedy in the making. Sarah heard the commotion from her house. She bundled the baby and ran toward the square, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. When she saw Arthur, silhouetted against the morning sky, she didn't see a madman. She saw the same quiet competence she had seen on her porch. She saw a man doing what he was born to do. The town's panicked whispers angered her. They didn't know him. They didn't see his kindness. On impulse, she pulled out her phone and called the mayor's office. She didn't know what she would say, only that she had to do something. A tired-sounding aide answered. "You have to stop them," Sarah pleaded, her voice trembling. "They're saying he's crazy, but he's not. He's a good man. He fixed my porch for free. He's just fixing things. That's what he does." The aide was about to dismiss her as another concerned crank, but something in her voice, a fierce, protective sincerity, made him pause. "What's his name, ma'am?" "Arthur Pendleton," she said. "But everyone just calls him Old Penn." The name, Pendleton, triggered a vague memory for the aide, a young man who organized the town's sparse Memorial Day events. He typed the name into a National Military Archive database, more to placate the frantic woman on the phone than anything else. He stared at the screen, then he typed it again. The result was the same. His eyes widened. He grabbed the phone and ran from his desk, straight to the mayor's office. Down in the square, Sheriff Brody had his bullhorn out. "Arthur, get down from there. This is not safe." But Arthur didn't hear him. He was in the zone, a place of pure, unadulterated focus. The wind, the height, the murmuring crowd below it was all just noise. There was only the task. He braced himself, his old muscles screaming in protest, and with a grunt of effort, he began to gently, firmly, bend the twisted copper back into shape. It was a dance of leverage and strength, of knowing just how much pressure the metal could take before it broke. At that moment, a black sedan pulled up, and Mayor David Chen stepped out. Chen was a young mayor, an Army veteran himself who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan. He saw the crowd, the sheriff, the old man on the roof end, his face hardened with concern. The aide rushed to his side, breathless, holding out his phone. "Sir, you need to see this. The man on the roof, Arthur Pendleton." Mayor Chen looked at the screen. He read the service record, the commendations, the long list of honors culminating in the Distinguished Service Cross. He read the citation, a dry, official account of a breathtaking act of heroism. Under heavy enemy fire and suspended from a helicopter hoist over a deep ravine, Sergeant Pendleton performed a life-saving thoracic procedure on a critically wounded soldier. He looked from the phone to the old man on the roof, who was now carefully tightening the final bolt on the rooster's mounting. The connection clicked into place with the force of a revelation, the impossible height, the intense focus, the life-saving work. This wasn't a suicide attempt. It was a mission. He walked over to the sheriff. "Give me the bullhorn," he said, his voice quiet but firm. The sheriff, flustered, handed it over. Mayor Chen raised it, but not to his lips. He held it at his side. He turned to the crowd, his face etched with a gravity that silenced them. "You all think you're watching a crazy old man," he began, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air, no amplification needed. "You're not. You're watching Sergeant First Class Arthur Pendleton, a combat medic, a man who spent 30 years pulling boys like me out of hell's fire." He paused, letting the words sink in. The town's collective expression began to shift from alarm to confusion, then to dawning comprehension. "They called him the Albatross," the mayor continued, his voice thick with emotion, "because he could save a life anywhere. On a cliffside, in a firefight, hanging from a rope 1,000 feet in the air. What he's doing up there isn't madness. It's what he's always done. He's seeing something broken, and he's making it whole." A deep, profound silence fell over the square. The snickers of the teenagers died on their lips. The pitying looks of the adults curdled into shame. They looked up at the old man, and for the first time, they truly saw him. They saw not the shuffling, eccentric, but the steady hand of a hero they had allowed to live among them as a stranger. The limp was not a sign of weakness, but a map of sacrifice. The quiet routines were not obsession, but the discipline of a soldier who had never truly left his post. High above them, Arthur gave the weather vane one final gentle push. The copper rooster swiveled, caught the wind, and pointed true north. Its proud form, restored and gleaming, seemed to salute the rising sun. His work was done. Slowly, carefully, he began his descent. When his feet touched the solid ground of the bell tower, his legs trembled with exhaustion. He expected to be met with handcuffs and stern lectures. He opened the door and stepped into the town square, bracing himself. But there was no anger. The crowd parted for him, their faces a mixture of awe and contrition. Sheriff Brody looked at the ground, unable to meet his eyes. Mayor Chen approached him, not as a politician approaching a spectacle, but as one soldier to another. He didn't offer a handshake. He simply stood before Arthur and gave him a slow, perfect salute. "Your work is done, Sergeant," the mayor said, his voice cracking slightly. "Thank you for your service." Arthur, bewildered, looked at the crowd, at the mayor, at the shining rooster high above. A lifetime of holding everything inside him began to tremble. He slowly, stiffly, raised a hand and returned the salute. He only managed a few words, the same simple truth he always fell back on. "It was leaning," he whispered. "It needed to be set right." There was no parade, no medal ceremony in the square. The town's recognition was as quiet and profound as Arthur's own nature. The next morning, a basket of fresh bread and jam from the baker was on his porch. When he went for his coffee, the owner refused his money, simply nodding and saying, "Good morning, Mr. Pendleton." The children who had once mocked him now stood aside as he passed, some even mustering a shy, "Hello, sir." He was no longer invisible. He was seen. That afternoon, Arthur didn't go to his workshop. Instead, he went to his backyard, to a fallow patch of earth where Eleanor had always dreamed of planting a rose garden. They had never gotten around to it. Life, and then death, had intervened, leaving the soil hard and barren. He took the old spade from the shed, its wooden handle smooth and familiar in his grasp. He looked up at the town hall, where the rooster stood proud and true against the blue sky, a symbol no longer of decline, but of resilience, of a duty fulfilled. Then he looked down at the earth. With a grunt, he drove the spade into the hard-packed ground. The soil resisted, then gave way with a satisfying crunch. He turned it over, exposing the dark, rich loam beneath. He worked for hours, breaking up the compacted earth, pulling weeds, preparing the bed. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold, he saw a small box on his front steps. It was from Sarah. Inside, nestled in soft tissue paper, was a single dormant rose bush, its roots carefully wrapped in burlap. A simple, handwritten note was attached. For the things that need to grow. Arthur carried it to the newly turned soil. He knelt, the familiar ache in his leg a dull, comforting presence. With his bare, scarred hands, he dug a hole in the cool, waiting earth. He gently placed the rose bush inside, spreading its roots, covering them with soil as if tucking a child into bed. He stood up, wiping the dirt from his hands onto his trousers. He looked at the single, hopeful plant in the middle of the prepared ground. For the first time in a decade, the silence of his home didn't feel like an absence. It felt like peace. The fortress around his heart had been breached, not by an attack, but by a quiet, persistent wave of kindness returned to him tenfold. Under the vast, open sky, with the town's restored sentinel watching over him, Arthur Pendleton, the man who fixed things, had finally begun to mend himself. And in the silent promise of a future bloom, he found his own reason to point true north.